It's one of the most popular miracles in the Gospels, what we heard today. As a matter of fact, it's in all the Gospels, all four Gospels, and that's not true of all the miracles. This particular multiplication of the loaves is in all four Gospels, and in one Gospel twice, because it's so significant, it seems. So we have it straight. John, and you notice we've diverted from Mark's Gospel in the last few weeks. We've been using Mark because it's this cycle. And now be aware that from the next few weeks on, we're going to be using John. And that might sound like, so what? But the theme is important. The theme that John will be expressing starts today in this section of the reading with something very simple but magnificent, the Eucharist. John doesn't have a Last Supper scene that we all know of in his Gospel. John only shows what the Eucharist is today, and the abundance of the activity that falls out of the Eucharist. We'll talk about that as we go along. Now, feeding, I'm an Italian, okay, Italian-American, and feeding has always been very important in our family. And before I even knew this gospel of the multiplication of the fish and bread, I remember in my household, we had like 4 rooms. We had a kitchen, a little room, living room, and 2 bedrooms. That was it. But I remember in that kitchen, the activity that went on every Sunday. A lot of food. We weren't wealthy. We lived in 4 rooms. We lived in a city, Jersey City. My father had a side job. He worked in a crucible company. His side job was, and I would join him on Saturdays picking up cardboard. These are the days before recycling. And we'd bring that cardboard to the junk man, we call them. It would be weighed, and he would get money for it, and I would get a little commission too. So it wasn't wealth that filled our kitchen. It was something else. I remember that idea of going to my parents' kitchen right through all my education, through grammar school, through high school, through college, seminary, always calling ahead, and we didn't have cell phones, but from wherever I was, call ahead and tell Mom, I'm going to bring a few guys over for lunch today. Okay. Never a question. And we had a little kitchen, little table, chairs around it. And when my friends and I would come into the home, walk up the hallway, and my mother would say, oh, you said you're bringing a few. And I would bring 5, 6, maybe more. And she'd say, and this was the standard, Frank, go downstairs and get more chairs. That was her way of welcoming. And I was so, I can't say I was proud of it because it was so normal. Looking back, I became very proud of the fact that with a little food, my mother and father could share the abundance of what they had. Oh, we're going to miss you. Come back later, okay? And that abundance was shared by my friends, people who came to our house. And it wasn't only friends, it was always, Sunday. Grandma and Grandpa were always there. My aunts were always there. My uncles were always there. And you got to realize the kitchen was small. But you live in an apartment, so you know what that's like. So today, Jesus is showing the abundance of love that he wanted us to know about. And again, I use my own parents' home because that was my first lesson in learning about the abundance of love that comes from sharing. Sharing food. We heard the story of Elisha. He shared food with 100 people from a few barley loaves. And barley was the cheapest kind of flour you could get. And then we look at Jesus, who fulfills that multiplication on a magnificent level. He takes a few pieces of barley bread, a few fish that a little kid has, and he tells 5,000 people to sit down, relax, because he's going to feed them. That hasn't stopped. Jesus still feeds us. Jesus still feeds us. Yes, we all know the main food is here, the Eucharist. But Jesus still feeds us with his words, with his actions, with his teachings. And growing up in a city and remembering that action, I know that we always had an abundance, and when people left our home, they were filled with love. They were also filled with pasta and meatballs. That goes without saying. But they were filled with love. And kids, I saw a priest maybe a month ago. My mother's name was Rose. She's deceased. And Michael Desmond, I remember him saying, "Oh, how's Rose?" I said, "Well, she passed." He said, "Oh, God, I remember going to Rose's house and sitting at Rose's table for hours." He's talking about my mother, "I remember going to Rose's house and sitting at her table with the other guys and eating so much I could never believe it." Yes, that's the kind of memories good, loving actions produce. But we have all of us share a much stronger memory with the actions of Jesus Christ. Yes, at the Eucharist. Yes, at the Last Supper. Yes, on the hillside today in the Gospel. But in everyday action, he feeds us. Multiplying food was not the big thing for Jesus. Feeding was the big thing. Uniting the people who sat there. You see how John is making that the Eucharist? What we do here, we come from diverse communities around the world, and we're one. We come in these doors, we're one. We're one family. And it's not just politically correct to say that. That's baloney. We're one because we share one bread, the body of Christ. And our goal is to keep sharing the body of Christ and the message of love that goes with that. Regrettably, there's many people in the world who would rather go hungry than receive that message of Christ, who would rather be starving with hate, with prejudice, with greed, with misguided political behaviors. You see, if they're in that category, they're not accepting Christ, and they're continuing their starvation of hate, their starvation of greed, their starvation of the magic word diversity. And we saw that this weekend at the Olympics. The Eucharist, the body and blood of Christ, the most important event in the history of creation, Jesus giving us his body at the Last Supper, was mocked. Worldwide, billions of people could see it at the Olympics. I'm not speaking against the Olympics. I pray. My nephews are athletes. They weren't there, but I pray for them. I pray for all athletes and the energy they put into their art, their skill. But the mockery of the committee, of the Olympic Committee, went far beyond what they proposed was diversity, depicting Jesus Christ and the apostles at the Last Supper, modeled on Leonardo's presentation in Milan. Got to the heart of hate, to the heart. It shows the starvation for love that's in the world. And they use misguided words like diversity. I'm sorry, that was not diverse. To have various people out of their gender, dressed up in bizarre outfits, mocking Jesus Christ and the apostles at the Last Supper is not diverse. It's downright mockery and a disgrace. And we saw that. The world saw that. And the world saw and still is looking for the Christian reaction. A lot of Christians have come forward and explained how it hurt them, how it hurts the message of Christ, how it gets under our skin, because You here today, we're here because of the Eucharist. We're here because of Jesus Christ. Here, in a few moments, he will be given to us in the Eucharist. And that's exactly what was mocked at the ceremonies. I guess we have a choice as to who we're going to follow. We can follow Jesus Christ. That's our choice, I hope. But so many people in the world are hungering and following Satan. And I'm not going extreme by saying what we saw in that enactment and mockery of the Last Supper was the work of Satan. Satan disguised as politically correct. Satan disguised as diversity. Satan disguised, and listen to some of your, I gotta say, our political leaders, how they praised that nonsense. Praised it, showing how everybody's accepted. I'm sorry, Christians were not accepted at that event. France is a Christian country. That mockery took place within the shadow of Notre Dame. And the politicians eat that up. And that eating is eating garbage. That eating up of that kind of mockery shows that Satan is so busy in this world, so busy, that he could get into the minds of those who planned that committee event and coordinate their minds to produce such mockery and such blasphemy. Again, I'm sure that those who planned that event, and I'm not talking about Celine, I'm not talking about the rest of the athletes, I'm talking about those on that bridge who were physically mocking Jesus Christ and the apostles and the Eucharist. And Mary, the Mother of God, with the key character wearing a crown with 12 stars. Please, how obvious can it be? But do they know that Satan inspired that? Right now, as I mentioned before, as we begin in the Catholic churches throughout the world, the next few weeks, focusing on the Eucharist, that's the thing that really got them. They took right from the scriptures and distorted it and blasphemed it, and they produced this mockery. And the church comes together today, as you just heard and will hear for the next few weeks, John's version of the Eucharist. Sharing, eating, hanging out with people, feeding. Jesus showing compassion. That's why we're here, because we've felt the compassion of Jesus in our lives. Maybe not every one of us every day, but if we practice it, we'll feel it more. And we'll share it with our children. Be careful of the words that the politicians use. They're very manipulative. They get paid the big bucks to be that manipulative, believe me. They hire the best firms so that you and I could be brainwashed into believing that what they're advertising is authentic and American. It's not. It never has been. We're not a perfect society, and we never have been. But we're striving as a Christian community within the American system to be people who stand out and stand up for Jesus Christ. We've been mocked. We've been taken over the coals by evil in the world that was called the Olympics. And it's not the whole event, it's the opening ceremonies that show diversity and show openness and show open-mindedness. And no, I'm sorry. We can't change God. I'm sorry, for those in our community, in our world, who were born one gender and want to change their gender. We can't change God. If that's the way we were born, that's the way we were born. And that's the person we have to develop into a good Christian. I don't care whose body you think you're in. Jesus gave us his own body on the cross and continues to give us his body in the Eucharist. And we don't have a better example than Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. We don't have a better example of his love for us than by giving his life that we might live. Not only here in this world, not only in France or in Europe, but for the rest of creation, to live as Christians, nourished by the body of Christ and challenged to share that body with those who are hungry, those who are poor, and those who are starving and are filled with Satan. They need you. Our world needs you. And Jesus did his part. You know what he expects of us, that we can give one another what he gave us himself.